Captain Alex Carter stood on the bridge of the Endurance, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. Her ship had been traveling for weeks, far beyond known space, exploring new stars and planets. It was supposed to be a routine mission. Nothing special, just more of the same. But when the crew detected a faint distress signal coming from an unknown planet, everything changed. The signal was weak, almost like a whisper, but it was enough to catch their attention. No one knew who was sending it, but Captain Carter couldn't ignore it. Her instincts told her that this was something important. She ordered the ship to change course, heading towards the source of the signal. The planet they arrived at was unlike anything they had seen before. It was a cold, dying world, covered in gray dust and crumbling structures. There was no sign of life, at least, not the kind of life they expected. But the signal kept coming, faint but steady. The crew of the Endurance was on high alert as they made their way down to the planet's surface. The ship's landing gear crunched against the planet's surface, and the airlock hissed open. Captain Carter, along with her second-in-command, Lieutenant Emily Hayes, and a small team of explorers, stepped out onto the barren ground. The sky above was a dull orange, the sun barely visible through the thick clouds of dust that hung in the air. "This place feels wrong," Lieutenant Hayes said, her voice filled with unease. "I don't like it here." "I know," Captain Carter replied, scanning the surroundings. "But we have to find out who's sending that signal. Someone needs our help." They moved cautiously through the ruins, their boots kicking up dust with each step. As they advanced deeper into the wasteland, they came across strange, alien ruins. The architecture was unlike anything they had ever seen. Smooth, organic shapes that seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. But there was no sign of life. It was then that they found it. A large, overgrown structure, almost like a temple, with intricate carvings covering the walls. The door was ajar, and from within, a faint glow flickered. It was coming from someone. Captain Carter exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Hayes. Without saying a word, they moved forward together, the rest of the crew following close behind. The door creaked open as they entered, and inside, they found what they had been searching for. A group of alien beings, unlike any species the humans had ever encountered, sat huddled together. They were thin and frail, with large, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Their skin was a pale, almost translucent shade of blue, and their bodies trembled with weakness. They were the Valkyrie, a race long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. One of the Valkyrie, an elder woman, slowly raised her head to look at Captain Carter. Her eyes were full of pain and desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a faint rasping sound escaped. Captain Carter stepped forward, kneeling beside her. "Are you the ones who sent the signal?" she asked gently, her voice filled with compassion. The elder Valkyrie nodded weakly. We are the last of our kind. We need help," she rasped, her voice barely audible. Captain Carter's heart sank as she listened to the Valkyrie's words. This wasn't just a distress signal. It was a cry for help from a race on the brink of extinction. The Valkyrie had been abandoned by every other civilization in the galaxy. For years, they had been ignored, left to suffer alone on their dying planet. Their once thriving civilization had been destroyed by wars and disasters, and now only a handful of them remained. They had reached out in desperation, hoping that anyone, would come to their aid. "We can't let them die here," Lieutenant Hayes said, her voice firm. "We have to help them." Captain Carter nodded, her mind already working on a plan. "We'll do everything we can, but we can't do it alone. We need to get back to the Endurance and contact Earth. This is bigger than just us. The whole galaxy needs to know what's happening here." The Valkyrie elder's eyes brightened with a flicker of hope. You will save us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We will," Captain Carter promised. "But first, we need to get you to safety." As they prepared to leave the temple, Captain Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Valkyrie had been abandoned for far too long. The humans would not turn their backs on them now. But as they made their way back to the ship, she couldn't help but wonder, would the rest of the galaxy stand with them, or would they face even more opposition? Whatever came next, Captain Carter knew one thing for certain. Humanity would not abandon the Valkyrie. Not now. Not ever. As the Endurance rose from the surface of the desolate Valkyrie planet, Captain Alex Carter stood at the helm, looking out through the ship's windows. The pale blue world below them seemed so fragile, like it might crumble away at any moment. But there was hope now. The humans had made contact with the Valkyrie, and they had promised to help them. But Captain Carter knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She turned to her crew, who stood quietly behind her. Lieutenant Emily Hayes, standing closest to her, gave a soft sigh. "We have to let Earth know about the Valkyrie. But how are we going to explain this?" Emily asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "The Council will want answers. They won't just let us help without question." Captain Carter paused for a moment, considering the weight of her words. She had known from the start that helping the Valkyrie would come with risks. The galaxy was a vast place, and the Galactic Council governed many of the decisions made in space. They didn't take kindly to planets being interfered with, especially when they believed the situation was hopeless. But there was something in the Valkyrie's eyes, something that stirred a deep sense of responsibility within her. She couldn't leave them behind. "We'll contact Earth," Captain Carter said, her voice firm, "and we'll make them understand. The Valkyrie are not a lost cause. They deserve help, and we're not turning our backs on them." The crew nodded, knowing that what they were about to do would change the course of history. Back aboard the Endurance, the communications officer, Ensign Daniel Foster, worked quickly to establish a secure link to Earth's command center. The quiet hum of the ship's technology filled the air as they awaited the connection. Captain Carter stood in the center of the bridge, feeling the weight of the moment. She was about to make a decision that could put them all in danger. The last thing she wanted was to anger the Galactic Council, but this was bigger than that. It was about doing what was right. When the screen flickered to life, General Diana Rice, Earth's highest-ranking military officer, appeared on the display. She looked tired, her face lined with stress from months of endless negotiations with the galactic powers. "Captain Carter, report," General Rice said, her tone direct and professional. "We've found the Valkyrie," Captain Carter said, her voice steady. "They're alive, but barely. Their planet is dying, and they need our help. I'm requesting immediate permission to begin aid operations." The general's expression shifted slightly. She leaned forward, her hands clasped together. "I'm aware of the Valkyrie," she said. "They've been abandoned by every other race. The Galactic Council considers them a lost cause. Why should we invest resources in them?" Captain Carter's jaw tightened. "Because they don't deserve to be abandoned. Every civilization has turned its back on them. They were once a powerful race, but now they're fighting to survive. I believe we can make a difference." There was a long silence. Captain Carter could feel the weight of the general's scrutiny through the screen. The Valkyrie were a delicate subject. Their history had been marred by conflict, and no one had come to their aid. The Council's stance was clear. They saw the Valkyrie as a burden not worth saving. "Captain," General Rice finally said, "I understand your commitment to this, but the Galactic Council will not approve this operation. It's too risky, and the political consequences could be severe." Captain Carter didn't hesitate. "I'll make it happen. The Valkyrie deserve a chance, and if the Council won't help them, we will. We have the resources, and I'm asking for your support." The general's eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping on the desk in front of her. "You're putting yourself, your crew, and the entire mission at risk. If you go against the Council, there will be consequences." "I'm aware of the risks," Captain Carter replied. "But we can't just sit by and watch them die. They've been abandoned for too long." General Rice let out a heavy sigh. "I can't authorize this officially, Captain. But I can't stop you either. You're on your own with this. Just remember, If things go wrong, it's on you." "Understood, General," Captain Carter said, her voice resolute. "Thank you for your trust." The screen went dark, and the bridge fell silent. Captain Carter stood for a moment, looking out the window at the stars. The decision had been made. They would help the Valkyrie, no matter the cost. As the Endurance moved away from the Valkyrie planet and into deep space, the crew went to work, gathering supplies and making plans. But the political weight of their actions hung over them. The Galactic Council would not be pleased, and if they were caught, the consequences could be severe. Yet, none of them wavered. They had made a promise, and they would keep it. Days passed as the Endurance traveled through the galaxy toward a new, secret location where the Valkyrie could be safe. Captain Carter knew that their mission had only just begun. They had become outlaws, defying the Council to protect a race that no one cared about. But deep in her heart, she knew they were doing the right thing. It wasn't about politics. It was about humanity. About doing what was right, even when the galaxy said it was wrong. The Valkyrie were not a burden. They were a chance for a new beginning. And Captain Carter would give them that chance, no matter the cost. The Endurance cruised through space, carrying the Valkyrie to a safe, undisclosed location far from their dying planet. But despite the quiet hum of the ship and the determination of its crew, Captain Alex Carter couldn't shake the weight of the decision they had made. They were now defying the Galactic Council, and she knew that the consequences could be severe. Back on Earth, the news of their actions had spread quickly. The Galactic Council, a collection of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, wasn't known for being forgiving. They valued order, power, and control. Any race that interfered in another's affairs risked drawing their ire. Captain Carter knew they had stepped into dangerous territory. Days after their departure, the ship's communication officer, Ensign Daniel Foster, alerted the captain to an incoming message. It was from the Galactic Council. The message was brief, but its tone was cold and threatening. "Captain Carter," the voice of the Council emissary echoed through the comms, "you have broken galactic law. Your actions in aiding the Valkyrie are a direct violation of Council policies. Return to the Council's jurisdiction immediately or face the consequences." Captain Carter stood frozen for a moment, the message hanging in the air. She had known this was coming, but hearing it aloud made it feel real. She turned to her crew, who had gathered around her, awaiting her response. "What do we do now?" Lieutenant Emily Hayes asked, her voice filled with concern. "The Council won't just let this go." "We don't have a choice," Captain Carter replied, her voice firm. "We've made our decision. We can't back down now." She took a deep breath and pressed a button on the console, sending a reply to the Council. The message was simple, yet powerful. "We will not abandon the Valkyrie. We are not returning to the Council. You cannot make us." As the words left her lips, she could feel the tension in the air. The response was immediate. The Council's emissary's voice returned, this time even colder than before. "You are warned, Captain. If you do not comply, you will be branded as outlaws. The Council will take whatever measures are necessary to ensure galactic stability. Your actions will be seen as a declaration of war." The screen went dark, leaving the crew in a heavy silence. Captain Carter's heart raced as she absorbed the threat. The Council had made it clear that they would not tolerate rebellion. But the humans had already chosen their path. They had made a promise to the Valkyrie, and they would not break it. "War," Lieutenant Hayes whispered, her eyes wide. "Do they mean it?" "They don't bluff," Captain Carter said, her gaze steady. "The Council has the power to destroy entire fleets if they see fit, but we've already crossed the line. We can't turn back." Ensign Foster, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "What if we're not the only ones who feel this way? What if there are others who want to help the Valkyrie too?" Captain Carter turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You may be right. There are other civilizations in the galaxy that have no love for the Council. If we can find them, we might have a chance. But for now, we'll need to rely on ourselves." The crew understood the gravity of the situation. They were no longer just a crew of explorers. They were rebels now, fighting for a race that had been forgotten by the galaxy. The Endurance was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of resistance. Captain Carter made the decision to keep their destination secret. The Valkyrie needed a safe place to rebuild, but if the Council knew where they were going, they would be able to track them. So the crew continued their journey through uncharted space, moving quietly and carefully. They couldn't afford to make a single mistake. But even in the vastness of space, they couldn't escape the Council's reach forever. As the Endurance approached a remote planet where the Valkyrie could start over, the crew received another message, this time from an unexpected source. It was a transmission from a ship, a small but heavily armed vessel. The voice that came through was unmistakable. General Diana Rice, the highest-ranking officer on Earth. The message was personal. Captain Carter, this is General Rice. I've heard about your actions, and I know the risks you're taking. But you need to understand something. The Council is not a force you can ignore. You're heading into dangerous territory, and there are consequences. I can't protect you from what's coming. Captain Carter's heart sank. She had hoped for more support, but it seemed the Council's grip on Earth was too strong. The General's warning was clear. If they continued, they would be on their own. Thank you for the warning, General, Captain Carter replied, her voice steady despite the pressure mounting around her. But we've already made our choice. We're going forward. The communication cut off, leaving the crew to process the new reality they were facing. The Galactic Council was coming for them, and they would stop at nothing to bring them to heel. The Endurance was no longer just a vessel in space. It was now a target, a beacon for those who would resist the Council's authority. Captain Carter knew that every decision from this point forward would be critical. There would be no more easy choices. Every move they made would have consequences. But as she looked at her crew, she saw the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her heart. They had made a promise to the Valkyrie, and no threat, no matter how powerful, would make them break it. The battle for the Valkyrie was just beginning. The Endurance glided through the vastness of space, its crew working tirelessly to ensure the safety of the Valkyrie. Captain Alex Carter stood at the front of the bridge, gazing out at the stars. The dark expanse of space seemed endless, and yet every star felt closer now. The pressure to succeed weighed heavily on her. The Valkyrie were depending on them, and the threat of the Galactic Council was a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Despite the risks, the crew had been working together with a single goal: to find a safe place for the Valkyrie. The planet they were headed to was an uninhabited world on the edge of known space, far from the reach of the Galactic Council. It was the only place they could go without the risk of immediate discovery. However, they would have to be cautious. On the bridge, Lieutenant Emily Hayes walked up to Captain Carter, holding a datapad in her hands. She looked worried, her face lined with concern. "Captain, I've been monitoring the communication channels," Emily said. "There's been a lot of chatter about us. The Council's ships are on the move. They're looking for us." Captain Carter sighed deeply, her eyes narrowing. "We knew this was coming. But we can't stop now. We have to get the Valkyrie to safety." Emily nodded, her gaze shifting to the group of Valkyrie gathered in the observation area of the ship. They were a race once full of pride and power, now reduced to a handful of survivors. The humans were their only hope, and they knew it. "What about our allies?" Emily asked. "We've been reaching out to other civilizations. Have any of them responded?" Captain Carter's eyes brightened slightly. "Yes. There's been a response from the Ironae. They're a peaceful species, but they've been in conflict with the Galactic Council for years. They're willing to help us." The Ironae were an ancient race, known for their wisdom and deep connection to nature. They had always stayed neutral in galactic affairs, but their dislike for the Council's growing power had made them a valuable ally. Captain Carter knew they would need all the help they could get if they were to defy the Council and protect the Valkyrie. "That's good news," Emily said with a small smile. But can we trust them? The Ironi aren't exactly known for taking sides. We don't have much choice, Captain Carter replied, turning to face the view of space again. They're the only ones who can help us now. Meanwhile, Ensign Daniel Foster, the communications officer, was hard at work. He had been monitoring all incoming transmissions, trying to find any signs of the Council's movements. He turned to Captain Carter with urgent news. "Captain, we've just received another message," he said, his voice tense. "It's from a ship calling itself the Starfire. They claim to be allied with the Ironi. They're offering us protection, but only if we meet them at the designated coordinates." Captain Carter frowned. She had heard of the Starfire, a rebel group that opposed the Council, but trusting them was a risk. She had to weigh the consequences carefully. "Are they legitimate?" Captain Carter asked, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They seem to be," Foster replied. "Their signature matches the Ironi's encrypted network, but we can't be sure until we meet them." Captain Carter stood in thought for a moment, considering the offer. The decision was difficult, but there was no time to waste. They couldn't afford to be discovered by the Council, and they needed more allies if they were to have any hope of succeeding. "Prepare the ship for a rendezvous," Captain Carter finally said. "We'll meet them, but we need to be cautious. I don't trust anyone fully right now." The crew immediately sprang into action, making the necessary preparations. Captain Carter knew the risks were high, but this was their best chance. As the Endurance approached the coordinates given by the Starfire, the tension aboard the ship grew. No one knew what to expect, but everyone was ready for whatever lay ahead. The rebel ship appeared suddenly in the distance, its sleek, dark design cutting through space like a shadow. It was smaller than the Endurance, but its weapons were clearly visible, a reminder that they were not to be underestimated. The Starfire signaled that they were ready for communication, and Captain Carter's voice rang out through the comms. "This is Captain Carter of the Endurance. We've received your message. We're here to talk." The response came quickly, a calm, steady voice that echoed through the speakers. "Captain Carter, we're here to help. We understand the risk you're taking. The Council has no mercy for those who defy them, but we share your cause. You're not alone." Captain Carter's heart lifted slightly. There was a glimmer of hope in the voice. Perhaps they had found true allies at last. "We're transporting the Valkyrie to a safe location," Captain Carter replied. "We need your help to ensure they stay safe from the Council's reach." "We'll protect you," the voice of the rebel leader said. "We've faced the Council's wrath before. We know how to hide from their ships. Stay close, and we'll make sure the Valkyrie get the peace they deserve." Captain Carter felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since they had set out on this journey, she felt like they might actually succeed. But the Council's threat was still looming, and time was running out. They had allies now, but they couldn't afford to waste a single moment. As the Endurance and the Starfire prepared to move deeper into uncharted space, Captain Carter couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a much larger struggle. They were not only fighting to save the Valkyrie, they were fighting to challenge the power of the Galactic Council itself. And Captain Carter knew that this fight would define the future of the galaxy. The stars outside the Endurance were brighter than ever as the ship entered uncharted space, flanked by the Starfire. The two ships glided in silence, the crew members aware that this was a critical moment. They were no longer just refugees or explorers. They were part of something much bigger now, a movement that had the potential to change the galaxy. Captain Alex Carter stood at the front of the bridge, her hands resting lightly on the railing. She had spent countless hours thinking about what lay ahead. Every choice they made could bring them closer to their goal, or lead them straight into the hands of the Galactic Council. "We've made a lot of enemies," Captain Carter said softly, her voice filled with resolve. "But we've also made allies. Now we need to be smart." Lieutenant Emily Hayes, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. "We can't just hide forever. The Council will keep hunting us, especially if they learn we have more allies than we thought." Captain Carter glanced over at the Valkyrie, who had gathered in the observation area. They were still adjusting to their new reality, far from their home and their old way of life. Their eyes, once filled with pride and power, now carried the weight of their people's future. They were putting their trust in the humans who had promised to protect them. The Valkyrie leader, a dignified male named Zarnak, approached the captain, his expression serious. "Captain, we are grateful for your protection. But our people need more than just safety. We need a future. We need to rebuild." Captain Carter met Zarnak's gaze. "We understand. We're working on that. But right now, we need to make sure the council doesn't find us. We're in this together." Zarnak nodded, though his eyes remained filled with concern. "I hope you're right." Meanwhile, on the Starfire, the rebel leader, a woman named Sarah, communicated with Captain Carter. "We're entering a region of space that's rarely patrolled by the council," Sarah said. "But it won't be long before they figure out what's happening. We need to move quickly." Captain Carter glanced at the star map displayed on the bridge. The route they were taking would lead them to an abandoned sector of space, a place where no major civilization had ever settled. It was the perfect place to lay low for a while, but the council would eventually catch on. "We'll get to the planet," Captain Carter said, determination in her voice. "And once we do, the Valkyrie will have a chance to rebuild. But we need to prepare for what comes next." "We'll be ready," Sarah replied. "We're in this fight with you, Captain." The two ships continued on their journey, but as they neared the planet, the tension on both vessels grew. Every crew member knew that this could be the moment everything changed. If the council didn't find them now, they might have a chance to build something new. If they did, they would have to fight for their survival. The Endurance entered the planet's atmosphere first, followed closely by the Starfire. The planet was a beautiful, untouched world, with vast oceans and green forests stretching as far as the eye could see. It was the perfect place for the Valkyrie to start anew, away from the reach of the Galactic Council. "Touchdown in T-10 minutes, Lieutenant Hayes called out, breaking the silence on the bridge. Captain Carter gave a small nod. "Prepare for landing. We need to make this quick and quiet. No mistakes." As the ships descended, the crew could feel the weight of the moment. They had come so far, but this was just the beginning. The future of the Valkyrie, and their own future, depended on what happened next. The Endurance touched down first, its engines powering down as the ship settled onto the planet's surface. The Valkyrie were already gathering their belongings, ready to start the next chapter of their lives. Zarnak was at the front of the group, looking out over the new world that would become their home. "We will make this work," Zarnak said, his voice steady. "We will rebuild with your help." Captain Carter walked up to him, offering a reassuring smile. "We're in this together. You're not alone." With the Starfire landing nearby, the crew began unloading supplies and equipment. The planet was rich with resources, but they would need to work together to create a safe place for the Valkyrie to live. The humans and the Valkyrie would have to learn to coexist, blending their cultures to ensure the survival of both. As the sun began to set on the distant horizon, the crew stood together, looking out over the land that would become their sanctuary. It was a beautiful sight, but the weight of the future still loomed large. "We've bought some time," Captain Carter said quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "But we can't let our guard down. The council will come for us, and when they do, we need to be ready." Lieutenant Hayes stepped beside her, her voice firm. "We'll be ready, Captain. We have a strong team, and we've got new allies. We can face whatever comes." Captain Carter nodded. The crew of the Endurance had become more than just a team. They had become a family, united by their commitment to the Valkyrie and to each other. Together, they had defied the Galactic Council, and together, they would stand firm against whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Captain Carter allowed herself to feel a small spark of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but they had taken the first step toward a future where the Valkyrie and the humans could thrive. And that was enough for now. The days on the new planet passed slowly, and with each day, the Valkyrie began to settle into their new life. The land was fertile, and the resources were plentiful. It was the perfect place for them to rebuild. Captain Alex Carter and her crew worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place. The Endurance was their base of operations, but the crew often ventured out to help the Valkyrie establish their first settlements. The air was clean, the sky a brilliant blue. The planet's two suns provided warmth and light, making the world feel safe and welcoming. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace among the Valkyrie. Captain Carter stood on the edge of a forest clearing, gazing at the distant mountains. The wind was gentle, and the sounds of birds and animals filled the air. She allowed herself a brief moment to enjoy the tranquility. "You should take a break, Captain," Emily Hayes said, walking up behind her. "You've been working nonstop." Captain Carter smiled but shook her head. "I can't afford to relax. We have to make sure the Valkyrie are settled in properly. There's still so much to do." "I know," Emily replied. "But we also need to be ready. The Council won't just let us disappear." Captain Carter's smile faded. "I know. We've bought some time, but I don't trust that it will last forever." The two women stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation heavy on their minds. Despite the peace of their new surroundings, they knew the calm was only temporary. The Galactic Council wouldn't stop hunting the Valkyrie, and once they realized where they were, they would come for them. "We need to increase our defenses," Captain Carter said at last, breaking the silence. "We can't afford to be caught off guard." Emily nodded. "I'll work on upgrading the ship's shields. We can't rely on just the Starfire and our limited resources. We need to be ready for anything." Meanwhile, the Valkyrie were not idle. Zarnak, their leader, had been busy organizing their people, making sure they were prepared for the long term. He approached Captain Carter as she was looking over the work being done around the settlement. "Captain," Zarnak said, his voice strong but tinged with uncertainty, "we are grateful for everything you've done for us. But we are not warriors. How can we defend ourselves against the Council when the time comes?" Captain Carter turned to face him. "You may not be warriors, Zarnak, but you have something they don't. You have the will to survive, and that counts for more than you might think." Zarnak nodded slowly, though his expression remained serious. "I hope you're right, but we must prepare ourselves. The Council won't stop until they've finished what they started." As the days turned into weeks, the Endurance crew and the Valkyrie worked together to strengthen the settlement. They built walls, reinforced their shelters, and gathered supplies. The Starfire continued to patrol the surrounding space, ensuring no one was able to locate them. But despite all their efforts, everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the Council discovered their location. One evening, as the sun began to set, Ensign Daniel Foster, the communications officer, brought urgent news to Captain Carter. "Captain," he said, his face pale, "we've detected a fleet of Council ships heading in our direction. They're getting closer. They must have traced us." Captain Carter's heart sank. It was happening sooner than she had hoped. She quickly turned to Emily, who was already at the tactical station. "We need to move," Captain Carter said. "Take the Endurance into the sky. We can't let them land here." Emily's fingers flew across the controls. "I'm on it. We'll lift off in 5 minutes." Zarnak and the Valkyrie gathered in a central meeting area, looking to the humans for guidance. They had been warned that this day might come, but the reality was still a shock to them. Their safe haven was about to be threatened, and they had no means to fight back. "Captain, what do we do?" Zarnak asked, his voice anxious. "We fight back, Zarnak," Captain Carter replied. "We don't give up this planet without a fight." The Endurance and the Starfire began to lift off, rising into the sky as the fleet of Council ships drew closer. The rebel fleet, though small in number, was ready to defend the planet. The humans had taught them how to fight back in the most basic ways, through resourcefulness and teamwork. As the ships ascended, Captain Carter looked down at the settlement below. The Valkyrie were depending on them to keep this world safe, and she couldn't let them down. "We need to buy the Valkyrie time to escape," she said, her voice resolute. "We'll draw them away from the planet and lead them into an ambush." "We're with you," Emily said, her hands gripping the controls tightly. "Whatever it takes," Zarnak added, his voice steady but full of determination. The Endurance and the Starfire sped toward the Council fleet, their weapons powering up. It was a risky move, but Captain Carter knew they had no other choice. The Council would never stop hunting them unless they showed the galaxy that they were willing to fight for what was theirs. The time for hiding was over. The sky above was filled with the roar of engines as the Endurance and the Starfire moved into position. The Council fleet loomed ahead, their ships massive and imposing. But Captain Alex Carter stood tall, her face determined. She knew this was the moment that would decide everything. The future of the Valkyrie and the humans who had vowed to protect them. "Ready the weapons," Captain Carter ordered, her voice steady as ever. Lieutenant Emily Hayes responded quickly, her fingers flying over the control panels. "Weapons primed, Captain. We're ready for anything." Captain Carter turned to Zarnak, who stood by her side, his eyes focused on the Council ships. "We will do everything we can to protect this world," she said. "Stay safe, Zarnak." Zarnak nodded. "We trust you, Captain. Our people are ready to rebuild, but we will fight if necessary." The Council fleet was now in range, their ships arrayed in a formation that spoke of military precision. But despite their size, the humans and the Valkyrie were not intimidated. They were united, determined to fight for their new home. Captain Carter's eyes narrowed as she focused on the Council ships. "Initiate evasive maneuvers," she commanded. The Endurance veered sharply to the left, its engines roaring to life as it made a swift move toward the Council fleet. The Starfire followed, its smaller, more agile frame giving it an edge in the upcoming battle. "We've got their attention," Emily called out from the tactical station. "They're closing in on us." "Don't let up," Captain Carter said, her eyes on the approaching enemy ships. "We can't let them land on the planet. If they take control, it's over for the Valkyrie." The Endurance fired its first volley of shots, the energy beams lighting up the dark space between the ships. The Council ships retaliated immediately, their weapons flashing as they fired back. The battle was fierce, but the humans and Valkyrie fought with everything they had. On the surface of the planet, the Valkyrie watched from the safety of their shelters. They knew that their fate rested on the outcome of this battle. It was a time of uncertainty, but also a time of hope. If the humans could drive the Council away, they would have a chance to rebuild. If not, they would have to fight again. Zarnak stood with his people, his mind focused on the sky. He had never imagined that his people would have to fight for a new home. But now, as he watched the battle unfold, he felt a sense of unity with the humans. They were not just allies, they were friends. Back in space, the battle raged on. The Endurance and the Starfire continued to maneuver with precision, avoiding the Council's blasts and striking back with powerful shots of their own. The Council ships were massive, but the smaller, more agile ships of the rebels had the advantage of speed. "We're making progress," Emily shouted over the noise of the battle. "Their shields are weakening." Captain Carter grinned. "Keep it up, everyone. We're almost there." The tide of the battle began to shift. The Council fleet, unable to land or make a significant impact on the rebels, began to retreat. The Endurance and the Starfire pressed forward, pushing the Council fleet farther away from the planet. "Looks like we've done it," Captain Carter said, her voice filled with relief. Emily checked the scanners. "The Council ships are pulling back. We've won." Zarnak, watching from the surface, let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The Valkyrie were safe, for now. They had been given a chance to rebuild, a chance to thrive, thanks to the humans who had fought alongside them. "We've done it," Zarnak said, his voice filled with awe. "It's over." Captain Carter looked out the view screen, watching as the last of the council ships disappeared into the distance. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. They had won, and the Valkyrie were free to build their future without fear of the council's wrath. But as she gazed at the planet below, a thought crossed her mind. This victory was just the beginning. The Valkyrie would need help to rebuild, and the council would not stop coming after them. There was still much to be done. "We have a long road ahead," Captain Carter said, her voice resolute. "But we've made it this far, and together we'll make sure the Valkyrie have a future." Zarnak stepped forward, bowing his head in gratitude. "You have given us more than safety. You've given us hope. We will never forget what you've done for us." Captain Carter smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "We'll always stand by you, Zarnak. The Valkyrie are our allies, and we're not going anywhere." The Endurance and the Starfire slowly descended back to the planet's surface. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. The Valkyrie would rebuild their society, and the humans would be there to help them every step of the way. As the ships touched down on the planet's surface, Captain Carter looked out over the new world they had fought for. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. There was peace here, for now. And with the Valkyrie by their side, the humans had found a new purpose, one that would help them protect this world, and many others, for years to come. The battle was won. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Together, humans and Valkyrie had forged a bond that would last for generations. And that was just the beginning.